Greetings. I'm Brother Antonio with Believers of the Way, San Diego. I want to give all praises to the Most High God of the Bible by way of His Son. I want to thank you for choosing this video. And the topic of this video is Mark chapter 7 and verse 19. Does it clean all foods or not? So in this video, I'm going to analyze Mark chapter 7 verse 19, and I'm going to show why you can't use it to condone eating unclean foods. So, and it's understandable why people would think that, because in certain translations it does say all foods are considered clean, and we're going to get into the controversy of the translation in this. So, and that's the first one I want to get into. So I'm going to start off just by reading Mark chapter 7 and verse 19. And I'm going to start off in the King James Version. So, actually I'm going to start at verse 18 for context. And he saith unto them, Are ye so without understanding also? Do ye not perceive that whatsoever thing from without entereth into the man, it cannot defile him? Verse 19, because it entereth not into his heart, but into the belly, and goeth out into the drop, purging all meats. So in the King James Version, when you read verse 19, it doesn't really sound like all foods will be cleaned. And that's the first point I want to get into. The reason that you cannot use Mark 7 and 19 to condone eating unclean foods is because there's a lot of controversy in the translation of this verse. So I'm going to read verse 19 one more time. Because it entereth not into his heart, but into the belly, and goeth out into the draught, purging all meats. So now I'm going to read verse 19 in the ESV. So this is the book of Mark chapter 7 and verse 19 in the ESV. Since it enters not into his heart, but his stomach, and is expelled, thus he declared all foods clean. And that was in parentheses when it says, thus he declared all foods clean. So you see that there's a lot of differences from the King James Version to the ESV. The King James Version just says that purging all meats at the end, whereas the ESV says, thus he declares all foods clean. So we're going to figure out why there's such a big difference between these two versions. But before I do that, I'm just going to read some other versions of verse 19 of Mark chapter 7, just so we can just so we can get a view of this. So this is the New International Version. For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach, and then out of the body. In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. Okay, so that was the New International Version. This is the New Living Translation. Food doesn't go into your heart, but only passes through the stomach and then goes out into the sewer. By saying this, he declared that every kind of food is acceptable in God's eyes. So even those two translations right there, they're similar, but they have a really different way of explaining this. So what you're going to see is, if you look into Mark chapter 7 and verse 19, you're going to see that there's the people who translated that verse, the different translators took a lot of liberties in what they added into there. And we're going to go down, let's see. Let's go to, because most of these versions have that part at the end where it says, thus he declared all foods acceptable. Oh, here it is. So this is the International Standard Version. Because it doesn't go into his heart, but into his stomach, and then into the sewer, thereby expelling all foods. And then that's it. And that version doesn't say anything about cleansing all foods now. and that one is translated more similar to the King James version. So you see that when it comes to this verse, there's a lot of different translations. And so one more time in the King James version, another point I want to make is the part at the end. Because it entereth not into his heart, but into the belly, and goeth out into the draught, purging all meats. So the part where it says purging all meats, usually that's where a lot of these translations go off. So when it says that Jesus declared all foods clean in a lot of these translations, it will have that part in parentheses. And the reason that's in parentheses is because when they were translating it, they thought that it might have been a, what's it called? They thought it might have been a parenthetical comment by Mark, meaning that Mark was not an eyewitness to the, he did not walk with Jesus. So he got his information from Peter. So a lot of translators believe that when he was writing this down with the information he got from Peter, he added that part in to explain what Christ was saying. But other translators don't think he was saying that at all. They have it as, like the KJV said, purging all meats. And purging all meats would mean like the natural elimination process of your body, like when you go to the toilet. So some people translate that as that. And we see that, one more time, what was that other version that also had it similar to the KJV? The International Standard Version also had it translated similar to the KJV. So, right, so some people believe that that was a comment added by Mark later on, and that's why they put it in parentheses to say that Christ did not say that out of his own mouth, which is interesting to note, because if you're somebody that likes to lean towards the translations that say he declared all foods clean, you need to know that that part in the parentheses never actually came out of Christ's mouth. That was something that the translators think happened, and they don't even know for sure if Mark thought that to add that. That's just what they assumed as they were translating it. But as we see that there are major differences in the translation of this verse. So since there's a lot of controversy over the translation of this verse, that means that we cannot use this verse alone to come up with an understanding. So in order to come up with an understanding, we're going to read the context to see what's happening in this account in the first place. And we're also going to go to other places in the Bible to get evidence to also to support the understanding that we're getting. So, context. So we're going to start at the beginning of Mark chapter 7 to get the context. This is the book of Mark chapter 7 and starting at verse 1. Then came together unto him the Pharisees and certain of the scribes, which came from Jerusalem. And when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is to say, with unwashen hands, they found fault. So automatically we get the context of what's going on. Mark chapter 7 is about eating food with dirty hands. It's not about eating unclean foods. Verse 3, for the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they wash their hands oft, eat not, holding the tradition of the elders. So the Pharisees say they don't eat anything unless they wash their hands first. And they said that this is a tradition of the elders. So this is not necessarily a commandment of the Bible that they're harassing Christ about. It's a tradition of their elders. Verse 4, and when they come from the market, except they wash, they eat not. And many other things there be, which they have received to hold, as the washing of cups and pots, brazen vessels, and of tables. Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, Why walk not thy disciples according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? So they're really holding Christ to the fact that he's not holding to the traditions of the elders, which I don't understand why they're putting so much emphasis on that instead of the Bible. Verse 6, he answered and said unto them, well hath Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandments of God, ye hold the traditions of men, as the washing of pots and cups, and many other such things ye do. So immediately Christ calls them out for holding him to the traditions of men instead of the commandments of God. Verse 9, and he said unto them, full well ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own tradition. For Moses said, honor thy father and thy mother, and whoso curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, if a man shall say to his father or mother, it is korban, that is to say, a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, he shall be free. And ye suffer him no more to do aught for his father or his mother, making the word of God of none effect, through your tradition, which ye have delivered, and many such like things do ye. So what he's saying right there is that they hold their traditions in such high esteem that they put them over the commandments in the Bible. And they have certain traditions that would allow somebody to disrespect their parents, just as long as they're holding to the traditions that the Pharisees respect. And disrespecting your parents would be breaking one of the commandments. So pretty much he's saying that they're putting their traditions over the laws of God. Verse 14, and when he had called all the people unto him, he said unto them, hearken unto me, every one of you, and understand. There is nothing from without a man that entering into him can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are they which defile the man. So what Christ is saying, that there's nothing that can come into your body physically that can defile your spirit, that can defile your spirit, but it's the things that you do that defile you. Now, this doesn't mean that you can eat anything and it's not going to defile your spirit, because if you know that you're not supposed to consume unclean foods and you do it anyway, then you're being disobedient on purpose, and that would be something that you're doing that can defile you. Now, if you're ignorant to it, then that's different. You didn't know what you were doing, and we know that God does forgive ignorance. But unclean foods do defile your body in a physical way. It might not defile you spiritually if you're ignorant, but it will defile you physically, because we know unclean foods carry diseases and parasites and etc. But so verse 18 again, and he saith unto them, are ye so without understanding also? Do ye not perceive that whatsoever thing from without entereth into the man, it cannot defile him? Because it entereth not into his heart, but into the belly, and goeth out into the draught, purging all meats. So pretty much he's saying that if you eat something that is physically dirty, it's not going to make your heart dirty. It's going to go through your stomach and out your body regularly. Verse 21. Verse 20. And he said, that which cometh out of the man, that defile the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile the man. So it's evil actions that defile you. And he didn't name all the evil actions, but another evil action would be breaking the commandments of God. And the dietary law is commandments of God. So that would defile you if you broke it. because that's something that is would be an evil thing. And in verse 23, that's when Christ said, all these evil things come from within and defile the man. Okay, so we got the context of this account. It's about people eating with dirty hands. Nowhere in this account did Christ say it's okay to eat foods that had been previously considered unclean. He didn't say you can eat those now. So now that we got the context of this verse, I'm going to go to two places elsewhere in the Bible to get supporting evidence to show that this is not about cleansing unclean foods. So this account is also told in the book of Matthew chapter 15. And we're going to read that real quick. And there's some things, and there's some notable things to point out. So in the book of Matthew chapter 15, the same account is brought up, but I'm going to skip to the end. Okay. So I'm going to skip towards the end where he would say that all foods are now declared clean in the other account. And I'm going to see what it says in this one. So this is the book of Matthew chapter 15, and I'm going to start at verse 8. This people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. And he called the multitude and said unto them, hear and understand. Not that which goeth into the mouth defile a man, but that which cometh out of the mouth, this defile a man. Then came his disciples and said unto him, knowest thou that the Pharisees were offended after they heard this saying? But he answered and said, every plant which my heavenly Father hath not planted shall be rooted up. Let him alone. They be blind leaders of the blind, and if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. Then answered Peter and said unto him, declare unto us this parable. And Jesus said, are ye also yet without understanding? So we're going to get the understanding. Do not ye understand that whatsoever entereth at the mouth goeth into the belly, and is cast out into the draught? But those things which proceed out of the mouth came forth from the heart, and they defile the man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashen hands defileth not a man. So, and that was the KJV, and it doesn't say anything about all foods are considered clean, but it didn't say that in Mark 17 in this version either. So now we're going to read Matthew chapter 15 in the ESV, and the ESV is the one that did include the Christ declared all foods clean in the parentheses. So this is the version that said that, and let's see if it says it again in Matthew chapter 15. So I'm going to start at verse 16. So this is the book of Matthew chapter 15 and verse 16 in the ESV. And he said, are you also still without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is expelled? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person. But to eat with unwashen hands does not defile anyone. And then that's the end of the account, and it goes on to a different story after that. So in the ESV, where it said Christ declared all foods clean in Mark 7, in the same account in Matthew, it doesn't say that at all. And And one thing to note about these two accounts is that Matthew was an eyewitness. Matthew walked with Christ. He was one of his disciples. So when he wrote down this account, he did not include anything about Christ declaring all foods clean. But in the book of Mark, chapter 7 and verse 19, that's where we see the Christ declared all foods clean in some translations in parentheses. Now, Mark was not an eyewitness to that account, and Mark was not one of Christ's disciples. Mark, from my research, Mark got his information from Peter, who was one of Christ's disciples, and so Mark was writing from, he was hearing secondhand. So that's another reason why you shouldn't lean towards the translations from Mark over this one in Matthew, because Matthew was an eyewitness. Not to say that the book of Mark is incredible, it's just that if people are having controversy over translation in the book of Mark, and we have the same story in the book of Matthew, then we can use that story in the book of Matthew to solidify the understanding that we need to get. So the thing that I want to note about Matthew chapter 15 is that, at least right here in the ESV, it does not say anything about Christ cleansing all foods in the same account. And another thing I want to point out, so going back to speaking of Mark again. So Mark got his information from Peter to write this account. And the thing about Peter is that, so Peter was one of Christ's disciples. So if Christ taught that all foods were clean, then Peter should be one of the main people that knows that. But in the book of Acts chapter 10, Peter is still avoiding unclean foods, and he hasn't eaten any unclean foods since that incident happened with Christ and the Pharisees. So we're going to read that real quick, and that's the second piece of evidence I'm going to go to support why you should not lean towards the translations that have Christ cleansing all foods. So this is the book of Acts chapter 10, and I'm going to start at verse 10. And this is speaking of Peter. And he became very hungry and would have eaten, but while they made ready, he fell into a trance, and saw heaven opened, and a certain vessel descending unto him, as it had been a great sheet knit at the four corners, and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of four-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and fowls of the air. And there came a voice to him, Rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. So this is way after that account in Mark 7. And Peter was walking with Christ. So if we're trying to figure out who translated Mark chapter 7 and 19 right, we need to think about the fact that Peter was there. And Peter still was avoiding eating unclean foods. I'm going to read that one more time in Acts chapter 10 and verse 14. But Peter said, Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. So he has never done it. He didn't do it after that account with Christ. And as soon as he even heard the idea of eating unclean foods, he immediately rejected it. So based off of those two pieces of evidence right there, the one in Acts chapter 10 and also the other account in Matthew chapter 15, I would have to conclude that the King James Version probably had it translated the best as describing the purging all meats as a elimination process of, when you go to the bathroom. It's not about Christ cleansing all foods. Okay, so to conclude, why does Mark 7 and 19 not clean all foods? Number one, there's a translational controversy with that verse. So if there's translational controversy of a verse, you can't use that verse alone. You need more evidence to build your understanding. Also, the context of that account is about dirty hands and not unclean food. Also, the other account in Matthew chapter 15 doesn't repeat the same phrase, and Christ declared all foods clean, at least right here in the ESV. And I think that's interesting because in the same Bible, two accounts have two different conclusions. And finally, the last reason why Mark 7:19 does not clean all foods is because the men who delivered, well at least Peter, who delivered this story, he wasn't eating unclean foods himself. And I'm pretty sure Mark wasn't either. I don't have any proof. But if Mark was learning under Peter and Peter was avoiding unclean foods that much, then I can be sure that Mark was too. But regardless of Mark's feelings, the Bible says that unclean foods are forbidden to eat. Christ says that not one jot or tittle shall pass from the law. So those are small laws, and the dietary law would include as one jot or one tittle. And yep. So I want to thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something. I hope it was straightforward, and see you next time.